It has been big news. Well, for the last 6 months, we've been hearing the words Silverlake, this US technology giant that wants to invest big money in our game right here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Sam Whitelock talked about it. There is a new deal on the table, and finally, New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association are on the same board. But here is what the original offer looked like. New Zealand Rugby was valued at $3.1 billion. Silverlake wanted to buy a 15% stake, which would have been $465 million injected into the local game here. That was then reduced to a 12.5% stake, but they couldn't see eye to eye on that one. So there is a totally new deal on the table, Jeff.
Yeah, we did the rabbit hole this last year, didn't we? For a few weeks, and it got very, very confusing. And we decided it was time to be played out in a different way, to be played out of the media. It got played out of the media.
Ugly.
It was ugly. And now it's got to this point about where this proposal is at. Remember, this still has to be agreed upon by the Māori Rugby Board and the provincial unions, but the valuation has risen to $3.5 billion on the back of this offer now, which includes $200 million going to New Zealand Rugby, which is that 5%, roughly there or thereabouts. Interesting from there's another opportunity for New Zealand Rugby to raise another $100 million, which could involve some investment within New Zealand. Importantly, though, that is underwritten by Silverlake. So they're able to pick up the difference of. So all of a sudden, we're looking at the amount of money, JK, that's being invested into the game. Now, you'd expect that they're going to find some way to get this across the line, New Zealand Rugby, because they know they need the capital injection. Big difference, though, between these numbers, JK. Is this going to be the difference on taking New Zealand Rugby to the next level in terms of the international exposure and the growth in the game they're looking at in New Zealand? I'm not 100% sure and convinced this is going to quite get there.
Yeah, no, I am. I just think they're engaged to be married, and it's a long engagement. I think
a lovely way of putting it.
Yeah, the deal that they've got there with the $100 million out. So the way I read it is, look, it's $300 million, but if you don't like us after a couple of years, there's the opportunity to bring someone else at $100 million. But if we like each other, let's get married and I'll give you $100 million. I think the other thing that's really interesting for me...
I wish it was that easy for all of us.
That's how I'm reading it anyway, Jane. That's how I'm reading it. I think it's also important that, you know, not mentioned is the players keep their 36-odd%. It's a media play, right? So you've seen the Six Nations come out last week and they made a statement with CVC, which is the equivalent of Silverlakes in the UK. So there is investment going into our game, and I'm just pleased we're in that game. We're on that boat and we're moving forward. There'll be an independent board created. It will have some rough seas, like any marriage, right? And I think where we've got to now, I'm really pleased that they took all the dirty laundry out of the public and we've come to a deal that seems, Mils, that everyone seems to be happy with.
Oh, yeah, and I think the pleasing thing is, one, that what you just mentioned, that they've now finally got something they're going towards, signing this deal off. The big point for me also is the value's gone up, considering, so obviously the worth in the jersey in New Zealand itself in terms of what we're producing is outstanding. So, and Sam's mentioned it before, you needed time to have a really good look at it. There's no doubt we need the injection of cash. From our grassroots, right through to our top players. What does that mean in terms of where we get to? I mean, we often go on end-of-year tour as the All Blacks, and that's our money maker, right? And this obviously gives us a chance to be able to inject some money into that to perhaps take some younger players and leave some of those guys here and leave some, those All Blacks that are thinking to go overseas, perhaps pay them a bit more, but not neglecting, where the game's going in terms of the women's game and also the younger generation. And I think that they're almost there. I'm glad we're talking about it now, that they're almost about to get a deal across the line, as opposed to all the dirty laundry that we had last year, because it was just shocking. Mentioning
the dirty laundry, there were some strong quotes coming out towards the end of last year. This one is from the former chair of New Zealand Rugby, Brent MP. It would be the biggest own goal in the history of New Zealand sport if the players didn't agree to this. This is a bold statement, Jeff.
At the time when the chairman comes out and says that, and I don't think that helped the relationship between New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association, and certainly there was some doubts about the direction I suppose that this was going to take New Zealand rugby. You talk about the legacy. I just look at this and there's a couple of questions for me. One, and truly, is there enough investment in the grassroots game to make a significant difference and turn the tide on the number of people that are playing the game? The kids continue to be strong, but it's the people and the players that continue through high school into the club environment and the strength of our NPC competition. Is the investment going to be there? Because if it's not enough to make a difference, then it has no impact. But the other thing for me is where the reward is for the players. Because clearly, on the back of this negotiation, they are satisfied for their piece of the pie. They will get significantly more money. I'm hoping that all of a sudden it goes across, in terms of the professional realm, JK, across the 225 players, not just the top 30. The 225, the guys who are on the minimum in Super Rugby, which hasn't changed. There are some things around that, but that hasn't changed since 1996, the minimum that a player can get. I think that's significant for me. That if you want to keep the middle tier of our game, this is their opportunity. You need to raise that money.
Yeah, well, then I'll throw to you, Mils. Look, I don't think just the money is going to get our game back where it needs to be. And we can talk about this in another show. I don't believe in academies and schools. Our kids, if they're not streamlined into academy at 12 or 13, they're not playing stuff anymore. But that's another issue. Just the money is not going to change our game. We need to change the rules. We need to do a whole lot of different stuff, Mils. I think the interesting, the big thing for me is this going to be the end of sabbaticals, financial sabbaticals in Japan? Are we going to have enough money? Because for the last 5 or 6 years, Mils, and you're a professional, you know, you'd get a big contract overseas and we couldn't match it here, and so we had to make that up. Will this change that, do you think, or not?
It possibly could. I mean, I know you talk about the money and there's other things that need to make a change, but money does help, and all that does, you know, Dan Cole is saying it's not about the money. There is a big factor that it is about the money, because without that money, that investment, how can you pay those players? How can you compete with the overseas? And then the factor of guys going on sabbaticals come into play, because you have to find a way for these guys to earn more money to keep them here. If we've got an injection of 200 million and also 100 million to be able to make, I like that, because now the onus is on the NZR board to be able to go there and use some of this money, whatever, to further it, because it's not just about piling money and trying to fix things. You've actually got to really grow it. And, you know, unfortunately for us, our biggest money maker has been the All Blacks. Even though we like to say Super Rugby and our NPC are great, it's great attraction, we're just too small to be able to make that work in terms of
We've got to invest in that game, though.
We've got to invest in it.
Yeah, but,
right.
But the thing for me, it is about the money. And, you know, Dane Cole should be getting as much money as he can out of the game while he plays. He's, you know, our rugby players around for a short time, so it is about the money, though. But I think the issue that we've got is our game is now broken into two, Mils and Goldie. Professional and amateur. But the professional game needs to finance the amateur game. But we need to split that.
You three are being very good, not talking over each other. There's no raised voices. We do hope you've come out of that better off, though, and have a greater understanding of Silverlake, because it can be a very confusing topic.